Going to get partial notes today.
Peter can okay.
I don't know.
I know he has the flu, but like.
Peter just gave up. All right. We were on illegitimacy. Yeah, so we were saying yesterday that a lot of unwed mothers were having sex on the promise of marriage, which was not uncommon, but with a lot of the rapid changes taking place in the late 1700s, it became harder for a lot of lower income people to find money or stable enough money to be able to provide for a family. So while that was very common back in like more of the rural times, and if you got pregnant, well, you just got married. Now it was a lot more difficult to provide for a family, so a lot of those dudes just bailed and were stuck with the children. The chicks were stuck with the children. So prices for food, homes, all that rose sharply in the back half of the 1700s. The lives of soldiers, laborers, servants were uncertain. So they were very probably concerned they couldn't follow through. So it's not middle class and upper class folks bailing on women with children, although it probably happened, but not as common. It was more of the lower income folks. So those laborers, soldiers, servants were uncertain. They couldn't necessarily follow through. Old patterns of faith and marriage and family were breaking down in the late 1700s, mostly because people moved away from cities, they're getting away from parental controls, all those things we talked about yesterday. And there's a lot of changing social conditions happening in the late 1700s. Okay, very good. It's pretty much where we left off. Caught up now. Okay, all right. Family and hospitals. So there's a lot of kids who are unwanted now. So despite opposition of the Catholic Church and the Church of England, some couples did practice birth control to avoid pregnancy, but there was still a lot of unwanted pregnancies. Because like that's still a thing in the Catholic Church, like, basically, you don't do any kind of birth control because the point of having sex is to have children. And so you're having couples either unwed or even maybe couples even married who are having unwanted kids. And there wasn't any kind of public financial support for unwed mothers who had children. So there was a big increase of dumped off babies or even killing babies, or in the late 1700s, because you say that, but that happens now, right? There's always stories in the news about like babies left in trash cans and dumpsters. That happens even now, right? Which is crazy. It's crazy because there are so many places now that'll take your baby. So I don't know why that happens, but
does it cost any money to put your child?
Yeah. No. There's drop off safe spots. Like, you ever see those yellow signs and stuff? Like hospitals, like the Lane's one. They'll have signs in front of them. They're usually fire stations, hospitals. But you just drop the baby off, no questions asked. That's it.
They
Free.
Just take it.
Just take it. Exactly.
The adoption thing, you have to pay money to be able to adopt. So why would they require money?
Yeah. It's just donate. It's like donation of books to a store. Goodwill, right? Especially
Mobile
babies.
library.
Right.
Pragmatically, sell black market.
Okay. That's also there you go. All right.
I was halfway through and I was like, no, this is bad.
So killing infants was a capital crime, so a number of women were hanged in the late 1700s for doing this. To relieve this problem, they developed foundling hospitals or foundling institutions. The first one made in Britain, you can see a picture of it here. A foundling hospital was established in 1739 in Britain for unwanted children. And Parliament initially said, we'll take any kids unwanted. So if you have an unwanted kid, this British foundling hospital will take them. So they had to change that policy after year one when they received 15,000 babies.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So they had to quickly reverse that stance. Conditions, though, at the hospital were not great. Obviously, it's one of those things where, they're trying to provide a service, but it's not the best service, and there's going to be a lot of issues, and there'll be a lot of bad conditions there, a lot of abuse that takes place there. So a lot of the kids struggle there as well, too. So conditions of the hospitals were harsh. Only about a quarter survived to adulthood. You ever seen Oliver Twist?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
But that wasn't exactly a foundling hospital.
No, but it's a similar idea. It's an orphan house
They
kind
should just do a
of
house
situation.
on the Just have your child go and get the fire.
There you go.
And then get them lost.
Just take me to the woods. Hey, kid, go find us some lumber.
So when they reversed that policy, they're
They didn't-
set some conditions.
Right, there's added
Something
conditions.
other.
Right. Just a little more conditions.
They
They
just
just
like shut it down completely.
right. It didn't shut down. It kept going, but like just it remained open. But obviously, it was probably always overbooked and understaffed and underfunded. So family hospitals are developed as a result of the explosion of illegitimate births that take place in the 1700s. All right, looking at birth and infancy. So childbirth, which almost always took place in the home, was dangerous, with high maternal and fetal mortality rates. So childbirth was always taking place in the home. You didn't go to the hospitals or any kind of like doctor clinic, also because those things didn't really exist then. But childbirth, which always took place in the home, was very dangerous and had high rates of maternal and fetal mortality. Maternal being the mothers and fetal being the babies. However, more and better food and less infectious disease meant once born, more children survived. And we're going to get more of that later on, but there's a lot of, there's a little bit more of an uptick in trying to prevent diseases in the late 1700s, like smallpox. And so when there's a bit better medical care, which is great, but the problem is now you got more kids, right? And, family hospitals and stuff. So more children are surviving. By the end of the 18th century, the traditional family pattern of many births and many infant deaths was shifting towards a pattern of fewer births and fewer infant deaths. So what was the norm in like the 1600s was like a mom would have, 5, 6, 7 kids potentially, and maybe only 1 or 2 survive to adulthood. Now it's starting to happen with changes in food, like we've talked a lot about the food changes and more nutrition and everything else. And we're also going to address medical improvements. With all that taking place, by the late 1800s, now women are having fewer kids or birthing fewer kids because why?
They'll survive.
They're surviving. Right. Good or bad, you decide. So there was considerable variation in infant care, both among different social classes. So there's considerable different variation in infant care for different social classes and in different countries. One very, I don't want to call it problematic, but one issue that was a problem for increasing births in Europe was breastfeeding. That there were some countries or some cultures who denounced breastfeeding, especially in France and Scandinavian areas.
That's okay.
That's how you
You
keep
can
your
call it
baby
problematic.
healthy.
Right. Well, there was a lot of beliefs that breastfeeding was actually harmful to the mother, so they refused to breastfeed. So like they created what's called a wet nurse. A wet nurse was somebody who just breastfed children. That was their job.
But how
No,
would
that's
that work?
problematic. It's like, we don't want you dying, so we're going to do someone else to do it.
But they got paid for it, so
But why did they think that her mother?
huh?
Why did they think that her mother?
I don't
Sucking
know.
out her life
Again,
force.
think about how many things that they did that it wasn't based on science. Like they just assumed that.
It unbalanced her 4 humors.
Exactly. There you go. Sucked out all the good blood. So in France and in Scandinavia, many women chose not to breastfeed, believing it was unpleasant and also bad for the mother's health. Some countries were fine with it, like Britain was fine. They breastfed their kids, and surprisingly, their kids lived better and were healthier. I know, crazy, right? Because you would send what's crazy too is that if you're wealthy, you would hire a wet nurse to come in, stay with your family, and basically kind of like a maid almost, or instead of it's a nanny / wet nurse, right? So she's breastfeeding the kid constantly. But if you're poorer or don't have the money to hire a wet nurse constantly, you would have to send your kid off to a wet nurse to live there. So you might have your kid live with the wet nurse for the first couple years of their lives until they got old enough to eat solid food.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Let me send off the bait. My child who was just born, who would make a good connection with my mother. Let me just send him away.
But again, that was the norm though. This is what people did. So that was just what was normal.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
At least you could spend more time on the farm.
Exactly. Spend more time working for wages. Exactly. All right. So there was an influential book called A Meal. It's also called A Meal on Education by your favorite guy,
Who?
Jean Jacket.
Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Mr. Cody was trying to defend him
Exactly.
the other day.
Who was?
Mr. Cody.
Really?
Yeah.
What did she say?
She was like, well, everybody was against me.
I did not miss a meeting. I was like, there were many
It's
men of
just
his
the fact that
standard
the
and
Enlightenment
lower
was
who believed that
happening. He
women
was
were
still
equal.
like,
He has no excuse for his
Exactly.
intellect to think in such
And his
a...
whole career
But hey,
was
romanticism.
created by women.
Just look, don't look at the bad stuff, right? Just look at the good stuff. So he writes this very influential novel, Emile, or On Education. He urged mothers to breastfeed their own infants. So there you go. He encouraged
Is that
mothers.
because he thought it actually killed them?
No. Jeez, no.
He's just trying to kill all the women.
He urged no, because they got to be here to make more babies. You can't like kill them off, right? So
No,
he urged.
make the baby and then die. That's your
He
only
didn't
purpose.
say that. He didn't say that.
That's what he said.
He urged mothers to breastfeed their own infants as an important step in comprehensive nurturing and educating the children. So this whole book is kind of like, from start to finish, how kids are raised or how they're developed. He believes that breastfeeding is an important step, and nurturing part of your raising your kid in general. His book also gave his view on education. He defined the role of education as fostering the innate curiosity of each child. So basically, what was the norm back in Europe in like 15, 16, 1700s was that you treated children like young adults. They were just a smaller adult. And so that's how they talked to them, that's how they treated them, that's how they punished and disciplined them, right? So he's like, don't do that. They're not adults, right? It's like a different stage of development. And so he's one of the first guys who's like, hey, childhood is a stage of development. They're not small adults, so you should help perpetuate innate curiosity, or encourage it, not say like stop doing that, or act like an adult, or act bigger, or whatever the case is.
Let the kids be kids.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Children should learn by following their own interests and reaching their own conclusions. So he said children should learn by following their own interests and reach their own conclusions. So obviously this is very much influenced by Enlightenment ideologies.
Having their own ideas. What?
Yeah.
But not women.
But look, romanticism, this book, hey, he's an okay guy, right?
Why is it called Emile?
Can we still have a
I don't know, it's a good question.
Does it like follow a specific kid named Emile?
Maybe it's just his character, I don't know.
I want to know.
Look it up. He argued that boys should get plenty of fresh air and exercise and receive not just book learning, but receive craft skills too. So boys should get plenty of fresh air, exercise, and receive book learning as well as craft skills.
And what do the
Crafts.
girls
Is that where
They
like
prepare for
is
making
that where like
babies.
the Boy Scouts like so?
But he argued that girls should focus on domestic responsibilities
Like having babies,
since they're destined for marriage and motherhood.
they're destined to have.
So they don't need to go outside and run around and play. They need focus on being educated about the household and raising the family.
So they can be
Go
really
If I went to school and they were like, hey Zach, you could go play on the playground. Maybe here's a broom. I would literally implode. I would implode and I would start arguing right there.
Look,
No, look,
Cody's right. She's an okay guy.
No, but listen, that could be our t-shirt, and have your son on the back in quotes and be like, here's a broom.
Maybe here's a broom.
What? Isn't that like what home ec is?
No, it's supposed to teach everybody there, how to be better.
No, I'm saying it's like.
Not the males there too?
There were very few men in home ec.
Well, listen, no one's making you take the class.
My
It's your
middle
choice.
school, assigned us random connections classes, and suspiciously, all of the girls took home ec while guys were taking home.
Well,
Nice.
that middle school was Catholic, wasn't it?
No,
It wasn't.
Was it in Louisiana?
no.
See, there you go. That's another reason why Louisiana's great.
Louisiana sucks. Louisiana sucks.
We're
At
number
least every
49.
It's like every day I'm like, am I really smart or am I just in this
I don't know
49th
your
ranked
You're
state?
smart. Listen, you're fine. Like, you're not, as far as classes and all that stuff, you're not behind anybody else in the country. It's always about level of rigor. And you're like, this is a national standardized test, ACT is a national standardized test, and how do y'all do on those?
Okay.
So like you're doing fine. Like A lot of you took A-push last year. A lot of you got 4s and 5s. Same thing that everybody else takes, right? And in fact, y'all got screwed over because y'all took the June version, right? Not even the
Oh
May
yeah, I
version.
remember. Y'all were babies.
I'm sorry. Because y'all got like the backup essay.
Y'all really
That's
did.
when we were behind.
It's like every
Yes.
single day they came up there like, oh, I'm sorry, 2 more weeks.
Yeah.
This is true, but like everybody does it. Everybody does the same test. So that's the point, right? It's a way to gauge yourself nationally.
Mountains.
But everybody does that. Everybody does it.
There's gold.
I'm not saying it's good, but that's how they do it.
They have the Pacific Ocean.
No, but you know that too. Like if you're a good test taker, like I've had plenty of good test takers who can make a great score on a test, but they're terrible students. Like they don't turn stuff in, or
Are you
like
talking on me?
Canterbury.
no, I'm put my hand up. But do you feel guilty? You feel like I'm going?
Yeah, honestly.
Really?
Oh,
All right. All right. You changed the thing.
Because I do good on tests, but I never do homework.
I'm the opposite. It's like I do all my work, and then the tests, it doesn't really reference.
Oh no, I just haven't finished. Okay, I'm sorry. I was confused with the paper and everything else. All right, what time is it?
Time for you to go.
I got a few minutes. All right. Changing views on childhood. So before the 18th century, the concept of childhood didn't exist as a development stage, as we just said. They were regarded as small adults. So in upper classes, they were strictly disciplined. In lower classes, they had to work just like adults did. So while they weren't necessarily strictly disciplined, they had to work, so they were treated like adults in that way too. Yes? Hey, finish your lesson, I'll leave my 5 minutes. And they're just going to watch your film the rest of the hour. Thank you for coming.
You know what I just realized?
What?
At the end of this year, you're gonna have like a good 3 weeks with like no second hour because we get out early.
It's true. That's all your senior years for the most part, though. That's
Well, yeah, but like this whole class is all seniors.
right. Well, this year? Yeah.
No.
Sure.
What if he was just like,
The Enlightenment elevated childhood and coincided with the rise of middle class possessing more resources. So this is part of the key concepts that basically by the mid-1700s, when the Enlightenment hits and people begin to change their ideas about childhood rearing, what's also taking place is that people are, like in middle and upper classes, because of wages, because of capitalism, they're having more resources and time and materials to devote towards children too. So that's a change that's brought on by consumerism, but it's also brought on by the Enlightenment as well. So like John Locke is somebody who promotes different ideas. We talked about his tabula rasa idea where everybody starts with a blank slate, which means as a kid, what forms you? Your experiences, your nurturing, right? Same thing with Rousseau. Rousseau expresses ideas in Emile. Artistic representations of children reflected this attitude toward children as well. So during the Enlightenment in like mid to late 1700s, you do see a lot of paintings. I forgot to add the paintings up here, but I'll
So is
do it
that
later.
like as opposed to those creepy paintings where they're literally just small humans?
Right, exactly. It's small adults as opposed to like, yeah.
At 4 years old.
So there's more like,
Standing on the mother's knee with perfect balance.
right, exactly. More or less the paintings, and I need to add that back in the PowerPoint, but there's paintings of like kids just being kids essentially, like playing or sitting outside and doing stuff. There's a very famous,
I was just about to say that.
there's a famous painting called The Age of Innocence. I'm not right up there. The Age of Innocence. You can spell innocence. There's a famous painting called The Age of Innocence by Sir Joshua Reynolds that demonstrates, normal childhood, not, like you were saying, weird little adults.
He did real children.
Exactly. All right, and I'll do education real quick, and then we're gonna get out of here. I'll get out of here. All right, education. Pre-Enlightenment, education had been mostly a privilege of the upper class. So pre-Enlightenment, education had been mostly a privilege of the upper class, and university focused on only certain areas like law or theology or medicine. So education was only really for upper classes pre-Enlightenment, and then university only focused on certain areas like law, medicine, and theology. The science revolution led to an increase in education, just like the Enlightenment did. So with the science revolution, which fed the Enlightenment, both those events in the late 1600s they had the idea that maybe everybody should receive education, or more people than just the upper classes should get education. Possibly. So printed material was more in demand in the Enlightenment. As we've already talked about, like printed material goes up, thus what goes up for regular people? Literacy goes up too. So literacy goes up because printed materials become more available. Whether it be newspapers or pamphlets, whatever the case is, or novels or books. Like we talked about Lenin libraries, right? Lenin libraries come out this time period, which just allows you to be able to have more access to materials. There's a Czech educator, John Amos Comenius. John Amos Comenius, who mostly lived in the 1600s. He's Czech, so he's living where right now? HRE or Bohemia area.
Check what?
He's a Czech educator.
I can't see that.
John Amos Comenius. Yeah. He developed the first comprehensive system of universal education, which helped influence the Enlightenment. So he developed the first comprehensive system of universal education, or this idea of like receiving more of a balanced education. He does this in the 1600s. So he does this in the 1600s. And so as a result of the Enlightenment and results of guys like Comenius, you're going to see countries begin to push the idea. Prussia's the first country. That's before, like Germany, which is at this point Prussia, is like at the forefront of like education. So in the mid 1700s, Prussia becomes the first country to have compulsory universal education. Compulsory meaning what? Required. You have to go, right? Just like now. So compulsory universal education becomes the norm in Prussia in the mid 1700s, and they provide free education for boys and girls 6 to 13. So they provide free education for boys and girls 6 to 13. Not the Roe version, right?
Oh, yeah. The Apple, correct.
I don't know how you feel about that, or Mr. Cody feel about that. All right, we'll stop there, and then the videos will pick up over the weekend, and then we'll either wrap up over the weekend or we'll wrap up on Monday. Test me today. Everybody's good?